My wife slept with my boss and helped him use my credentials to frame me for a workplace accident. I played dumb for a month, then filed a complaint that burned their careers. All right, Reddit. My wife used my own login to sabotage the safety systems I'd spent 14 years maintaining, then tried to pin it on me so our boss could keep his numbers clean. She forgot I'm the guy who reads the logs. Here's the deal. I've spent 14 years making things disappear on cue. I'm Dexter, 38 male, and I run show control automation at the Meridian, one of the biggest mega resorts on the Las Vegas Strip. Last Tuesday, I caught a turntable encoder drifting 0.2 of a degree during pre-show checks, recalibrated it in 9 minutes, and had the stage locked in before the house opened. Nobody in the audience knew anything happened. Nobody backstage mentioned it either. That's the job. My wife Stephanie worked at the Meridian too, stage management side. She'd started as a production assistant 6 years ago and climbed fast. Full stage manager for the resident show inside of 4 years. We met during Tech Week for a show relaunch. I was debugging a fly cue that kept drifting 3 inches off its mark. She was the one who noticed it from the deck before I caught it on my screens. She came up to the booth after the run, introduced herself, and said, if my system was going to try to kill her performers, the least I could do was buy her dinner. I liked that. Direct. No games. We were married 14 months later. For a while, it was good. We understood each other's schedules. We'd drive home together after shows, decompress over takeout, talk through the problems we'd solved that night. She got my world because she lived in it. The Meridian's resident show ran on about 200 people, all reporting up through a production hierarchy that answered to the resort's entertainment VP. At the top of our particular food chain was Jensen Ortega, the executive producer. Mid-40s, silver hair, tailored everything. The kind of guy who says synergy without flinching. He'd come over from a competing property 3 years ago with a reputation for being equal parts brilliant and ruthless. Most people either worshipped him or avoided him. Most did both. I'd always gotten along with Jensen fine. Professional respect, minimal small talk. He'd never once questioned my cue programming or second-guessed a safety call, which meant he either trusted my work or didn't understand it well enough to argue. Either way, he left me alone. Stephanie, though. Stephanie had caught his attention early. He started pulling her into planning meetings that were above her pay grade, praising her work publicly in production calls, recommending her for the stage manager promotion when there were 2 other candidates with more seniority. I noticed it. I just filed it under ambitious boss recognizes ambitious employee and moved on. That was my first mistake. The distance between Stephanie and me didn't creep in slowly like some couples describe. It arrived with the new production season. Jensen greenlit a massive show overhaul. New acts, new scenic elements, new automation sequences that required months of reprogramming. Everyone's hours went up. We went from driving home together to barely overlapping. She'd get home after me, or before me, or not at all. Crashed in the green room, she'd text. Early call tomorrow. Easier to just stay. I didn't question it because I knew how production cycles worked. Crunch time is real. You live at the theater for weeks and then things calm down. That's the deal. But the crunch ended in October, and Stephanie's hours didn't change. The late meetings continued. The overnight stays kept happening. And something in the way she talked about work shifted. She used to vent to me about Jensen's demanding personality. Now she defended him. He's under so much pressure. People don't understand his vision. He's actually really thoughtful once you get past the exterior. That last one was my favorite. That was the man who once made a wardrobe intern cry over a misplaced cufflink. Thoughtful. I let it slide. Ran my pre-show checks, kept my cue stacks clean, went home, didn't bring it up. Other things changed too. Stephanie started hitting the gym before dawn. 4:30 wake-ups when she'd always been a snooze button person. New clothes a step above what stage managers typically wear backstage. More time on her appearance before heading to a building where everyone wore blacks anyway. Shopping bags from stores we'd never been to together? Always a reason. Needed new stuff for the gala. Or wardrobe had a note about dress code. We stopped eating dinner together most nights. Our kitchen, which used to be where we decompressed after shows, became a room I passed through on my way to the garage. I'd eat standing at the counter and tinker with equipment until I was tired enough to sleep. Some nights I'd hear her come in after midnight, shoes in hand so she wouldn't wake me. I pretended to be asleep every time. Then a flybar almost killed someone, and everything I thought I knew about my life came apart in about 72 hours. It happened on a Tuesday night during the second show. Flybar 7, a 40-foot steel pipe carrying a 300-pound LED drop, ran 6 feet past its low trim during a scene transition. That's not a drift. That's a catastrophic overshoot. The bar stopped 8 inches above a performer's head, 8 inches between a routine Tuesday and a career-ending injury or worse. The emergency stop triggered automatically. House lights came up. Show halted for 11 minutes while we ran safety checks. I was in the booth within seconds, pulling logs, checking sensor data, trying to figure out how a system I'd calibrated 2 weeks ago could overshoot by 6 feet. The logs didn't make sense. The Q file showed the correct target position, but the motion profile had been altered. Someone had changed the acceleration curve and removed a soft limit parameter that I'd programmed specifically to prevent overshoots. The edit timestamp was from 3 days earlier, during a maintenance window, and the edit was logged under my credentials. Except I hadn't made that edit. I knew it the way you know your own handwriting. That change wasn't mine. I would never remove a soft limit from a fly queue. That's Automation Safety 101. I reported the discrepancy to the technical director immediately and started my own investigation before the ink was dry on the incident report. Pulled the full audit trail. Checked the booth access log for that maintenance window. The system showed an entry at 2:14 p.m. and exit at 2:47 p.m., a 33-minute session attributed to my workstation account since the system was logged in under my credentials. But I had a receipt from a supply house across town, timestamped at 2:22 p.m., buying replacement contactors for a dimmer rack. I was physically off property when someone sat down at my console and modified that queue. Someone had accessed the booth with my login, and the badge system had a gap that everyone knew about, but nobody had ever fixed. Supervisory level badges could authorize booth access for anyone in the department. It had been set up that way years ago, so stage management could get into technical spaces during emergencies without hunting down an engineer. Convenient policy. Stage management had supervisory access. Stephanie had supervisory access. The credentials themselves weren't hard to figure out. The automation workstation stayed logged into my session between shifts. Standard practice because rebooting cost 20 minutes of recalibration. It wasn't supposed to stay that way permanently, but production weeks turn temporary into forever. Anyone who could badge through the booth door could sit down and make edits under my name. Stephanie knew this. She'd watched me work from that chair hundreds of times, and I'd told her over dinner once that I never logged out during production weeks. I'd handed her the key to my own career without realizing it. I pulled the booth access history for the week. 3 sessions attributed to my workstation account during times I could verify I was elsewhere. One was during a matinee when I was on the main stage running cable. Another was at 6 in the morning on a day I didn't arrive until 8. The third was the maintenance window, where the fly queue got altered. Then I checked who else had badged into the production corridor during those windows. Stephanie's badge appeared within minutes of each unauthorized booth entry, and Jensen's office badge out times aligned with the same windows, suggesting he was in the production area too. I sat in the booth after the second show staring at those logs. The picture was clear, but it still didn't explain why. A dangerous automation edit that gets traced back to me would damage my career, sure. But it's a strange way to hurt someone, unless damaging my career was the point. I called Sal before I left the building. Sal was the rigging lead, 22 years in the business, a Yahtzee through and through, built like a fire hydrant and about as easy to move. He'd been on the fly gallery when Bar 7 overshot and was the one who'd pulled the performer clear. We'd been working the same show since I started at the Meridian. When I set a trim mark, his crew hung loads off it without double-checking. When his riggers called down about a cable that looked wrong, I shut the system down before I asked questions. He picked up on the second ring, told me he'd been waiting for my call, said there were things I needed to know about what was happening on his deck, and that I should come in early tomorrow and bring coffee. I didn't sleep that night. Lay in bed while Stephanie breathed evenly beside me, phone tucked under her pillow like always. At 3 in the morning, I got up, went to the garage, and organized my tool drawers for an hour. Sorted every connector by gauge, lined up every driver bit by size. Pointless work that kept my hands moving, while my head processed what I already knew, but wasn't ready to say out loud. Sal and I met in the rigging loft at 6 the next morning, 2 hours before anyone else would be in the building. He sat on a road case, took the coffee I handed him, and didn't waste time. Your wife and Jensen have been together since at least June, he said. My guys see everything from the gallery. They just can't say anything because Jensen signs their contracts. I didn't react. Just let him keep going. But that's not why I told you to come in early. He set his coffee down. They've been changing loads on my deck, Dexter. Approvals with Stephanie's signature that never came through you. Rigging configs that don't match your specs. And when Bar 7 almost dropped on Kenji's head Tuesday night, every piece of paper in the system says you approved the modification that caused it. I didn't. I know you didn't. That's the problem. Jensen and Stephanie had been involved for at least 4 months. The crew knew. Stagehands aren't blind. They see who stays late in whose office, who disappears during breaks at the same time. Sal's guys had kept their mouths shut because Jensen controlled contracts and nobody wanted to get blacklisted for talking about the EP's personal life. But the personal stuff wasn't what had Sal worried. Over the past 3 months, Jensen had restructured the approval chain so that show-critical changes went through stage management first, Stephanie signing off before engineering even saw them. On paper, a workflow efficiency improvement. In practice, changes were being made to my systems without my knowledge. Sal had the receipts, photos of the Fly Gallery logbook showing 3 rigging configurations in 2 months that didn't match my specs. Weight loads adjusted, trim heights modified, pick points relocated. All approved by Stephanie, all countersigned by Jensen. None through my desk. I asked Sal why he hadn't reported it. He gave me a look. He had reported it. To his union steward, in writing, 3 weeks ago. The steward had escalated it to the production office, Jensen's production office. Shocking outcome. It went nowhere. Filing a complaint about the boss to the boss's own office. That's like asking the fox to audit the hen house and being surprised when he shows up with a napkin. I spent the next week building my case, pulled every document I could access. Approval chains, badge logs, queue edit histories, email threads where Stephanie or Jensen had authorized changes without my sign-off. Cross-referenced the unauthorized booth entries with Jensen's calendar and Stephanie's stage management logs. The pattern was airtight. Every time a change was made under my credentials, both of them were in the building and I was provably elsewhere. I also started looking at the bigger picture. Jensen's contract renewal cycle was already underway. His show needed to hit performance metrics, audience numbers, safety record, operational efficiency to justify his next 3-year budget. A clean safety record was essential. They weren't just having an affair. They were building a fall guy, and they'd picked the most boring, predictable, head-down engineer in the building because they assumed I'd never look up from my screens long enough to notice. I went home that night and sat in the garage for 3 hours, just sat there running the timeline. 4 months of an affair, 3 months of approval chain restructuring, multiple unauthorized system modifications under my name. If the state had investigated that near miss before I caught the discrepancy, the first name on the liability chain would have been mine. 14 years of showing up, running clean systems, and going home without anyone getting hurt. All of it sacrificed so Jensen could keep his metrics clean and Stephanie could ride his coattails into a bigger title. The thing that hit hardest wasn't the affair itself. Stephanie had watched me come home every night, eat dinner at the counter, go work in the garage. She'd watched me be the reliable, steady, boring engineer she'd married, and she'd decided that the safest person to sacrifice was the one who trusted her most. I needed someone who knew the Meridian's compliance machinery, which policies had been broken, which regulators would care, and which internal processes would trigger consequences that a well-connected producer couldn't quietly bury. Rachel Okafor was a risk and compliance analyst in the resort's internal audit division. We'd crossed paths during a safety certification review the previous year. She'd audited the show's automation protocols, and I'd walked her through every system. She was thorough. Jensen had tried to rush her through the process. She'd ignored him. I looked her up in the resort directory and asked for a meeting about automation safety documentation concern. She scheduled me for the next morning. I brought everything: badge logs, queue edit timestamps, the restructured approval chain, Sal's logbook photos, schedule overlaps. I laid it out on her desk like a circuit diagram, every connection labeled. Rachel went through it methodically, no expression on her face. After about an hour, she leaned back in her chair. "This isn't an HR matter," she said. "This is regulatory." "How bad?" "Unauthorized modification of safety-critical systems using falsified credentials, combined with a restructured approval chain that created an unmonitored compliance gap." She tapped the stack of badge logs. "If the state finds this before we report it, the resort loses its operating certification. That's not a fine. That's dark theater. So they'll take it seriously. They won't have a choice." She asked if I wanted to file a formal internal complaint. I told her not yet. I wanted to understand the timeline first. She pulled up the resort's inspection and audit calendar. Next state safety inspection, 8 weeks out. Jensen's contract renewal review, 10 weeks. Rachel told me a formal complaint would trigger a mandatory review. If that review surfaced regulatory violations, the resort had to report them before the next inspection. File at the right time, and the findings would land on the contract renewal committee's desk at exactly the wrong moment for Jensen. I asked her what the right window was. She said she couldn't advise me on timing. Then she turned her monitor toward me. The resort's inspection and audit calendar was still on screen, and said, "This is a shared resource. Anyone in the building can access it." She let me look at it for about 10 seconds before turning it back. 4 weeks until the filing would hit at exactly the right moment. I did the math myself. I thanked her and left. Started counting days. During those 4 weeks, I locked down my personal finances, moved my savings into an individual account, consulted a family lawyer, found a new apartment across town, and started moving boxes to a storage unit while Stephanie was at work. I kept documenting every unauthorized access, every bypassed approval, every schedule overlap. Files in 3 locations, my laptop, an encrypted USB in storage, and a copy with my lawyer. 2 weeks into the waiting period, Stephanie came up to the booth during a maintenance window. Casual, relaxed, clipboard tucked under her arm. She said Jensen needed the Act 2 fly sequence retimed to shave 4 seconds off a transition, and the change needed to go in before Friday's show. She slid the clipboard across the console, a pre-filled modification request with my signature line already highlighted. The form looked clean, professional, except the retiming she was asking for would require disabling the deceleration buffer on 2 flybars, which is exactly the kind of shortcut that had caused the near miss in the first place. She framed it perfectly, talked about the Friday VIP group, how Jensen was under pressure, how the timing gap was making the show look sloppy, offered to handle the paperwork side if I just approved the parameters, helpful wife, supportive colleague, the whole package. All she needed was my real signature on a modification that would compromise safety margins, and this time, the paper trail would be legitimate. I told her I'd need to run the calculations and would have an answer by end of day. She smiled, said no rush, and left the clipboard. I photographed the form, documented the interaction, and returned the clipboard unsigned the next morning with a memo citing the specific deceleration parameters that made the change non-compliant. Copied the technical director. Stephanie's smile went flat for about half a second when she read the CC line. Then she thanked me for being thorough and walked away. Sal kept his crew quiet but alert. He documented 2 more rigging discrepancies during that period, modifications approved by Stephanie that didn't match engineering specs. He logged them in the union book and gave me copies. The file grew thicker. The hardest part wasn't the investigation or the documentation. It was the acting. 4 weeks of sitting in production meetings across from the 2 people who were trying to ruin my career and behaving exactly the same as I always had. Stephanie would glance at me sometimes during Jensen's presentations. Quick, assessing looks, like she was checking whether I suspected anything. I gave her nothing. Same flat expression. Same technical questions. Same Dexter. The last week before my filing date, I made one deliberate move. During a routine production meeting, full room, department heads, the technical director, 2 union reps, Jensen brought up a scenic transition change that required modified fly cue timing. Stephanie had already prepared the paperwork. She started walking the room through the schedule impact, her voice smooth and confident, with that same energy that made her good at her job. I waited until she finished. Then I asked one question, whether the modification had been routed through engineering for safety review per the resort's standard approval protocol. The room went quiet, the kind of pause that happens when someone asks a question everyone else was trying not to think about. Stephanie said it had been handled through the streamlined workflow Jensen had implemented. I asked if that meant engineering sign-off had been obtained. She said the new process didn't require separate engineering sign-off. I said that was interesting, because the resort's operating agreement with the state of Nevada did. Then I pulled out a single sheet of paper I'd had in my folder all meeting. A printed copy of the resort's Regulatory Compliance Handbook, Section 11.4, with the relevant paragraph highlighted. I slid it across the table to the technical director and said I was formally invoking stop work authority on the proposed modification until proper engineering review was completed and documented. Nobody argued. The technical director initialed the stop work. Stephanie's face didn't change. She was too controlled for that, but her pen stopped moving. Jensen said something about keeping things moving efficiently. I told him efficiency and compliance aren't mutually exclusive. They just require the right approval chain. The union reps wrote something in their notebooks. The meeting moved on. What I'd actually done was put it on record, time-stamped, witnessed, that Jensen's restructured approval chain violated state regulations. Just a boring engineer citing a handbook. Nothing to see here. One night during that stretch, I ran into Jensen in the parking garage after the late show. Just the 2 of us and the echo of our footsteps on concrete. He stopped and turned. He was trying a little too hard to look casual. Dexter, that new motor on the main turntable. Running to spec? 0.2% variance on acceleration. Within tolerance. Good, he nodded. Show's looking tight. Best it's run in months. Your work. He paused. Let the compliment sit. Then the pivot. I've been hearing some concerns from stage management about turnaround on engineering approvals. Nothing major. Just a sense that things are getting bottlenecked. And with the contract review coming up, the last thing any of us need is the ops team seeing delays in the pipeline. There it was, wrapped in corporate language and reasonable tone. Sign off faster, ask fewer questions, don't become a problem. My turnaround times are the same as they've been for 14 years, I said. I know. I'm just passing along the temperature of the room. He smiled. We're all on the same team, right? The show's the thing. He wished me a good night and walked off toward his car. Smooth. If I hadn't already seen the logs, I might have actually felt guilty about my approval turnaround times. That's how good he was. Walking to my truck, I thought about how easy it would be to confront him right there. I got in my truck, drove home, and added another entry to the evidence file. Same as every other night. I filed the internal complaint on the date I'd marked. 27 pages, cross-referenced and indexed. Every badge log, queue edit, approval chain memo, and rigging discrepancy I'd collected over the past month, plus my verified alibis for every unauthorized booth entry, filed through the resort's compliance portal, which automatically CC'd internal audit, HR, legal, and the operations VP, case number within the hour. Formal investigation by end of day. The Meridian's internal investigation team moved fast when regulatory exposure was involved. Within a week, they'd interviewed the technical director, pulled independent badge log analysis, and subpoenaed the automation system's full audit trail from the vendor. Jensen found out about the investigation on a Thursday. I know because I watched the color leave Stephanie's face during a production meeting when the operations VP's assistant came in and asked Jensen to step out for a compliance matter. He was gone for 2 hours. When he came back, he went straight to his office and closed the door. Stephanie's phone started buzzing. She excused herself from the meeting and didn't come back. That night, Stephanie came home to the apartment she thought we still shared and found half the closet empty. My workshop shelves cleared out. The spare bedroom where I kept my documentation files stripped down to bare furniture. I'd moved the last of my things that afternoon. She called me 9 times. I answered on the 10th. Where are your things? Her voice was tight, controlled, but barely. Storage, along with years of misplaced trust. Dexter, please. Whatever you think is happening, I don't think anything, Stephanie. I have badge logs showing you accessed my booth 3 times using supervisory override while I was off property. I have queue edits timestamped under my credentials that I didn't make. I have the approval chain restructuring that Jensen implemented to cut engineering out of safety sign-offs. And I have a 27-page complaint filed through internal audit as of Monday. Silence. When she spoke again, the tears were gone. Her voice went flat. Cold. The real Stephanie. If you'd just talked to me first, we could have handled this without involving the whole company. And there it was. Her first instinct was damage control. Even now, with the walls closing in, she was calculating who knew what and how to limit her exposure. My lawyer's name is on the paperwork. Expect a call Monday. She tried the script after that. The tears came back on. It's not what you think. The Jensen pressured me. Impressive range. I told her the badge logs showed her accessing the automation booth voluntarily on multiple occasions to modify safety-critical systems under my credential. That's not pressure. She asked if we could talk in person. I told her there was nothing to talk about that wouldn't be better handled through attorneys. Then I hung up. The next morning, I sat in my truck in the parking garage for 10 minutes before going in. Walking past Stephanie in the production corridor felt like crossing a stage in front of a hostile audience. She tried to catch my eye. I looked straight ahead, badged into the booth, and started my pre-show checks. 8 o'clock show. Same as every other night. Stephanie's next move was smarter than I expected. The woman had climbed from production assistant to stage manager in 4 years. She didn't get there by being obvious. Over the following days, she started telling colleagues she was worried about Dexter, that I'd been really withdrawn lately, obsessive about documentation, difficult about approvals. She framed it as concern. Loving wife, troubled husband, planting seeds so that if the investigation turned into a he said, she said, there'd be a chorus of people ready to say Dexter had been erratic. The problem was her strategy required people to not compare notes. Within a week, 3 different colleagues had independently mentioned to Sal that Stephanie was really concerned about Dexter, and Sal pointed out to each of them that in 14 years, nobody had ever once described me as erratic, withdrawn, or difficult. But before her narrative died, it got to the technical director. He pulled me aside during a pre-show and asked if I was doing all right. Said he'd heard I'd been having a rough stretch. The look on his face said he was checking whether I was stable enough to run the show that night. 14 years of clean operations, and I was being asked if I needed a mental health day because my wife had spent a week whispering. I told him I was fine and ran the show, but I felt that one. During the next production meeting, Stephanie was controlled, running through her notes with the same efficiency as always. But her pen hand shook when she turned pages, and she never once looked at my section of the table. Jensen was the opposite. Louder than usual, cracking jokes, dropping references to the contract renewal like it was already in the bag. A man whose entire professional life was about to be fed through a shredder. Talking about 3-year budget projection. You had to admire the commitment to the bit. The investigation expanded over the following weeks. The audit team discovered Jensen's approval chain restructuring had been done without authorization from the operations VP, a compliance gap that violated the resort's operating agreement with the state. 3 safety modifications Stephanie had approved without engineering review were flagged as non-compliant. The near miss was reclassified from equipment malfunction to unauthorized system modification, triggering mandatory state reporting. Jensen hired a lawyer. Stephanie hired a different one. Neither of them could undo what I'd already put in play. The state inspection arrived right on schedule, 4 weeks after I filed. The Nevada Division of Industrial Relations doesn't joke around with entertainment venue safety. Their inspector spent 3 days in the building, and by the time she left, she had a stack of findings that made Jensen's contract renewal conversation very different from the one he'd been planning. 4 citations. 2 for the unauthorized automation modification. 1 for the approval chain restructuring that created an unmonitored safety gap. 1 for failure to report the near-miss incident through proper regulatory channels within the required time frame. The resort's legal team was not pleased. Their insurance carrier was even less pleased. Turns out the people who calculate your liability premiums get really interested when they find out someone's been modifying your safety systems off the books. The contract renewal committee met the following week. Jensen walked in expecting to present his 3-year proposal. Instead, the operations VP, the resort's general counsel, and 2 insurance representatives were waiting with the state inspection findings, the audit report, and my original complaint. His renewal was denied. Contract terminated with 30 days' notice. Material breach of operational safety protocols. No severance beyond minimum. No recommendation letter. Just a box, an escort to the parking garage, and a reputation that would follow him to every production meeting in the city. I was in the booth running pre-show checks when security walked Jensen through the production corridor for the last time. I saw it through the booth window, him carrying a banker's box, a security officer a half step behind, the corridor empty because word had spread and everyone had found somewhere else to be. He paused outside the automation booth door, looked in through the glass. Our eyes met. He set the box down, opened the booth door, and stepped halfway in. The security officer put a hand on the doorframe behind him. Jensen ignored it. "You could have come to me," he said. Even now, carrying a box with security at his back, he was still performing. "We could have worked this out, between professionals." "We are working it out," I said. Didn't look up from my screen. "The state of Nevada, your insurance carrier, and the resort's legal counsel are working it out right now, professionally." The mask slipped for just a second. Then he picked up his box and kept walking. The man who'd spent 3 years being the loudest voice in every room left the building in complete silence. I finished my pre-show checks. Q1 verified, Q2 verified. The show started at 8, same as always. Stephanie's termination came 2 days later. Different grounds, unauthorized access to restricted systems, and falsification of engineering approvals, but the same result. Escorted out, badge deactivated. Her stage management team was handed off to the assistant, who'd been quietly covering for Stephanie's absences for months. The union filed a separate grievance on behalf of the rigging crew. Sal's documentation established his riggers had been working under conditions they hadn't consented to. The resort settled quickly, but the settlement included a permanent note in both Jensen's and Stephanie's personnel files. I ran the show the night after Jensen's termination, like any other Tuesday. Fly bars moving where they were supposed to move, stopping at the Markside program. Sal came up to the booth after the show, stood in the doorway, and didn't say anything for a minute. Then he told me the crew had taken up a collection and bought me a bottle of fancy hot sauce. Apparently someone had told them I was into that, and it was waiting for me in the rigging loft. I told him the crew didn't need to do that. He shrugged and said they wanted to. Then he shook my hand and went home. The divorce was straightforward. Stephanie didn't fight it. Her lawyer had seen the evidence and advised against contesting anything. We split the joint accounts. I kept my truck, my tools, my savings. No property to divide. The rental was in both our names and we'd both vacated. Signed within 6 weeks. 3 years of marriage, 6 weeks to dissolve. Apparently commitment has an expiration date, and nobody tells you when you sign up. Jensen's downfall continued in slow motion. Word circulated through the network of producers and technical directors who run every show on the Strip. Not on social media, just private conversations and hiring committee meetings, the kind of damage you can't PR your way out of. He applied to 2 other resort production divisions. Neither called him back. Last I heard, he was consulting for a regional theater company in Reno, from headlining the Strip to community theater budget meetings. The untouchable executive producer turned out to be very touchable once the right people touched the right files. Stephanie landed at a smaller production company doing corporate events, trade shows, product launches, a universe away from stage managing a strip resident show. She tried reaching out to me twice through mutual colleagues at the Meridian. Both times, the message was some version of wanting to explain her side. Both times, I declined. There's no version of "I stole your credentials to modify safety systems while sleeping with your boss" that needs a rebuttal. 6 months after the filing, I was still at the Meridian. That surprised some people. They expected me to leave. Fresh start, clean break, the whole narrative. But I'd spent 14 years in that building. I knew every circuit in every panel, every cable run behind every wall, every quirk of every motor that moved every piece of scenery on that stage. I wasn't going to walk away from that because two people tried to use it against me. The resort's new entertainment VP met with me during her first week. She'd read the investigation file, asked what I needed. I told her, restore the original engineering approval chain, audit every modification from the compromised period, and upgrade the booth to biometric access. She approved all three within the week. The show ran better after that. Not because Jensen was gone. The new producer was competent, but cautious. It ran better because nobody was tampering with the systems between shows. Sal told me his guys were sleeping better. No more coming in and finding loads changed overnight. No more wondering if trim marks were going to match what the automation system expected. 3 months after the new VP started, the resort created a new position, Director of Show Systems and Safety Compliance, and offered it to me. What it meant in practice, I now signed off on every automation and rigging modification across all three of the resort's production venues. Not just the resident show, all of them. No more having changes routed around me. No more finding out after the fact that someone had altered my systems. I accepted. The salary was fair. The authority was the part that mattered. Rachel later told me the position had been created specifically because of the investigation. The resort's legal team recommended a structural change to prevent the kind of approval chain manipulation Jensen had pulled off. 27 pages of documentation, and the org chart moved. The last piece fell quietly. 6 months after their terminations, both Jensen's and Stephanie's names were attached to the state citations in Nevada's compliance records. The kind of thing that surfaces whenever a venue pulls licensing history or runs a background check during hiring. 2 notations in a state system that would follow them every time they applied for a position requiring safety oversight. Quiet, permanent. The kind of thing you can't explain away in an interview. After everything settled, life got quieter. I moved into a 1-bedroom in Henderson with a garage I converted into a workshop. Started picking up automation consulting gigs for smaller venues around town. Community theaters, dinner shows on Fremont. Small jobs, but satisfying. These were people who appreciated competence because they couldn't afford to waste money on mistakes. I didn't date. Wasn't close to it. Just not in any rush. Everything else could wait. Sal invited me to his daughter's quinceañera a couple months after everything settled. 3 hours of incredible food and 60 people filling a rented hall. On the drive home, I took the long way down the strip, past the Meridian's marquee glowing against the desert sky. The show was running clean. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.